Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian. Hope you're having a great day today. It's time, you guys, for my best books of 2024. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be like on the other end of making this list, to be honest, because it took me so long to narrow down my top 12 books of 2024. So if you have not already watched my honorable mentions, what I'm doing this year is, because it's 2024 and I read 200 books in the year, I am going to go ahead and be doing my top 24 in 2024. My honorable mentions are numbers 13 through 24, and my best books are numbers 1 through 12. While my honorable mentions were not ranked, I have loosely ranked my top 12. This changes day to day. Like, even as I was writing it out on paper rather than on my phone, I changed the rankings a little bit. So take that with a grain of salt. I will say my favorite book is my favorite book, and my second favorite book is my second favorite book. Everything else, all over the place. Before we jump in, please tell me what your favorite book is of 2024 so I can read it and love it with you, and we can talk about it and just have a good time. It would also be great if you would like this video and subscribe if you want to. Let's jump in. First up, my 12th favorite book of 2024 is In the Grave Where the Bones Are Still Wet by Kalvin Ellis. I love this book so much. This is a fantastic sequel to a horror book, and this is a horror book as well. Book 1 is called In the Hills Above the Gristmill. That's the name of book 1. I have a review for both books 1 and 2 that I will leave linked down below, but what you need to know is this book follows Paisley Mott, who is a supernatural investigator of sorts. She has a vlog, a podcast type situation where she goes from town to town investigating supernatural things, trying to debunk them or investigate them, etc., etc. In book 1, she goes and visits this small town where there's supposedly a Sasquatch that is kidnapping women and harming them, and things go from there in that book. And this is a direct sequel, so we follow Paisley right after the things that happened in book 1. And we also get her relationship with a lot of the characters from book 1, now that we know who we can trust since we know what was going on in book 1. I really enjoyed that a lot. I love the characters and the relationships that really were built in this book. But what I loved most about this was the horror, guys. This was a wild, unhinged book with some great twists that I didn't see coming. Kalvin Ellis really took this book in a lot of directions that I think were really bold and that I didn't anticipate. And I'm hungry for book 3. Please check this book out, you guys, or rather check out book 1 if you haven't already. It's amazing. His books are so much fun. Book 1 definitely leans a little bit more on the thriller side, while book 2 is definitely more on the horror side. So if you want to be eased in to the horror, definitely check out this series. I think it's amazing. Coming in at number 11, we have a horror book that has truly stuck with me throughout this year, and that is Brother by Anya Allborn. This book is wild. So in this, we follow a young man who has been adopted into this family. They're all terrible people. They hunt people and digest them. So that's the basic setup of this book, is that you have this character who is pulled into this family, and he has become like them in certain ways, but in other ways he really does not want to be like them at all, and he has this longing inside of him to live a normal life. But he lives with this family in this wilderness, and he just doesn't know what to do with himself. And he gets into some situations in this book that I don't want to delve too deeply in. If this book sounds interesting to you, read it. If it doesn't sound interesting to you, don't read it. For me, it was my jam. It was awful, gut-wrenching at times, but oh my goodness, I've thought about this book numerous times since I finished it, and the ending is one that I think is one of the best endings to a horror book that I've ever read. So there you have it. If this book sounds good to you, check it out. If not, don't. Coming in at number 10, we have a 2025 release that is not available to buy yet, but you can pre-order it, and you should. The book that I'm talking about is Greenteeth by Molly O'Neill. I really enjoyed this book so much. It was the right book at the right time for me, and I think about it all the time, and it makes me happy when I do, which everybody needs a book like that, especially when you read a lot of horror and mystery thrillers. Having a book in your year that just brings you light is so nice. And that's what Greenteeth was. So like I said, this book does not come out until February, I believe February 25th. I'll go ahead and leave a link down below to pre-order it. But what you need to know about this book is that we follow Jenny Greenteeth, who is a lake creature. She has lived in the lake for hundreds of years and kind of eats whatever comes in there, including, people. But one day, a witch is thrown in the lake, and she decides to save the witch, and things go from there. This book is full of adventure, it is full of heart, full of wonderful, lovable characters, a trio of characters that I just adore, a lovable animal companion, quests, evil and good rising up to defeat that evil, and just it's got like so many things that I love in a story, and it did all of those things so beautifully. And in addition to that, there's a great, wonderful atmosphere to this, a love of nature that just seeps from this book, and I just adore it so much. You guys are not going to want to miss this. I have a full review down below if you want to check it out. I love Greenteeth. It's amazing. Definitely deserves to be on my top 10. Coming in at number 9, we have Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel, and also, I will say, Waking Gods, the sequel to Sleeping Giants. So these books are part of a trilogy of sci-fi novels by Sylvain Neuvel, and they are so fascinating. They truly are, and they're best experienced on audiobook for sure. What we get in this story is, at the very beginning, a young girl is riding her bike, I believe, and she falls into this hole and lands on a giant hand made of some metal that is not easily identified. And so things go from there. It's now the future when that girl has grown up and is now a scientist. And her life's mission is to discover what this hand is, how it got here, and if there are other parts throughout the earth as well. And it goes from there. That's the story. But how the story is told is through a series of files regarding this whole project. And so we get interviews, we get different transcriptions, we get a whole bunch of different stuff that all contributes to the telling of this story. And it's one that immediately hooked me. Like, immediately I was like, this is really cool. And the way that the author tells the story is so compelling. I found it so fascinating, and I just wanted to find out more and more about this discovery that they made. And I love the characters too. Books 1 and 2 were absolutely amazing. I have finished this trilogy, and while the third book, Only Human, is not as good, I do still think it is good. But books 1 and 2 were 5 stars for me. Loved them so much. Thank you so much to Jake from The Book Drummer for making me read the first book, and then I consequentially read books 2 and 3 as well. It was a good time. Thank you, my friend. Definitely check out Sleeping Giants if it sounds interesting to you. I think it is a great, accessible sci-fi book that is an amazing audio experience, and it's very short as well, so check it out. Coming in at number 8, we have a collection that I didn't think was necessarily going to make my year-end list, but I've thought about some of the stories in this collection so many times this year, I felt like it was demanding to be on this list, and that collection is The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. This is not a perfect short story collection. I have yet to discover a perfect short story collection, but this one has some of the most thought-provoking, emotional, powerful, philosophical, amazing stories that I have ever read, whether in long form or short form fiction. It is truly a testament to Ken Liu's ability as a writer, as well as his intelligence and his wisdom and so many things. This guy is brilliant. He's brilliant. And it's one that I think will benefit greatly from a reread. Not necessarily the whole collection, although maybe I'll enjoy the ones that I didn't enjoy as much more on a reread as well. I think that this book is full of gold. It really is. If you're looking for a short story collection to read in 2025, let me recommend The Paper Menagerie to you. It is the best short story collection that I read this year and one of my favorites of all time. It's incredible. The next book is one that just barely made the list for me, but it did. Coming in at number 7, we have Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I read this about a week ago, but it's one that packs a punch. It really does, especially considering how short it is. It is just so well crafted and so excellently done that I couldn't help but keep it on this list. So Small Things Like These follows an Irishman in the 80s, I think, or maybe the 70s, as he's just living his life, raising his 4 daughters, living with his wife, and kind of living in response to his upbringing of his mother having a child, him, out of wedlock, and him not knowing who his father is. A lot of who he is defined by that upbringing of relying heavily upon the kindness of others, but also understanding that there are people out there who are just going to see you as an outcast. And additionally, having that question in his head of, who is my father? What am I in relation to him? And what legacy am I making for my children that I want to kind of create on my own, since I don't have the legacy of my father to uphold? This story really takes off, though, when the protagonist stumbles upon a young woman who is being held in a shed at a convent for reasons that we soon discover, and through that discovery, he unveils a lot of the secrets of this convent in his community. But those things kind of play a very heavy role, as well as how the community responds to this knowledge. and the urging that he receives to just forget about it and worry only about himself, while that contrasts with his upbringing and the things that he believes at his core. This is a very profound story, and one that I found myself reflecting on quite heavily over the past week or so since I read it, and it's one that I feel greatly deserves to be on this list, and it's one that I think people should read. Ultimately, it's just a story about humanity and how kindness should ultimately rule out over anything else, but how it often doesn't, and I think it's one that is worth your time, absolutely. It's very short, so if you want to read some literary fiction in 2025, I definitely recommend Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Coming in at number 6 is a book that I have debated very heavily about where to put on my list, because when I first read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this might be my book of the year. And in that time, it has tarnished in my view a little bit. I still love this book and it still makes my top 10, but it's not perfect, and its flaws are more evident to me now than they were upon initially finishing the book. And of course, the book I'm talking about is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, book 5 of the Stormlight archive. I have a review for this that I'll leave linked down below, where I kind of go into my conflicting thoughts, but ultimately I came out a lot more hopeful than I'm necessarily feeling right now. Look, this book is amazing, and the moments in this book that shine so magnificently. I love this book for so many reasons. It's not the strongest Stormlight Archive book by any means, but at the same time, the destination we end up at and so many moments throughout the journey of this book were amazing that I cannot help but put it in my top 10 of 2024. It's a doorstopper of a book. It's like 1,350 pages or something like that. And it can sometimes feel like the pacing is a little bit off, but if you love fantasy, I don't know how you could not read Stormlight Archive, because it is an icon of the genre with some amazing characters, wonderful discussions of mental health, and some huge story arcs that just pay off so tremendously in this book. I really enjoyed Wind and Truth overall, and it definitely deserves a spot on my top 12 of the year. Okay, we're in the top 5, baby. Top 5. This was tough to narrow down. Again, a lot of these books shifted all around, but my top 2 are my top 2. Probably my top 3 or my top 3. So let's go ahead and jump in. Coming in at number 5, we have a series, that being Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinman. This is the most fun that I had all year. Like, it's such a good time. It is unreal how addicting these books are. And they just brought me so much joy when I was binging them with my brothers when we were buddy reading them, that I love these books, and I can see myself rereading them at any given time. They're just such a fun experience. So if you don't know anything about Dungeon Crawler Carl somehow, because they're everywhere now, these books follow Carl and his cat Princess Donut as they are thrust into this intergalactic competition where basically aliens come down, they shove all of the things on Earth's surface beneath the surface, creating this elaborate dungeon with many levels to it. And any people who are left alive, basically anyone who was outside during that experience, because everyone who's inside is either dead or forced into the labyrinth in some really weird ways, everyone who's alive is forced to either be enslaved or compete in this competition where they just have to try to progress through this dungeon as far as they can. And this book is wacky. It is so weird. If that sounds weird, you don't know the half of it, because Matt Dinman takes this book and this series to such strange places in the most amusing way. I cannot recommend the audiobooks for these enough. Like, I will not read them physically, even though the most recent book, book 7, is out in ebook and physical book. I'm not touching it because I want the audiobook. It's just too good. I cannot wait to read book 7 in February. It's going to be amazing. But anyway, if you want a book that is just going to make you literally laugh out loud, I laughed out loud so many times listening to this, and I rarely do that. Just read these. They're so unpredictable and fun and just a great time. And there's actually some pretty good themes in here as well that kind of reveal themselves throughout the series, and I was taken aback by that because somehow Matt Dinman takes the most absurd and ridiculous and amusing story ever and makes you think about our society and how broken it can be sometimes. And yeah, it was really good. It's really, really good. So check out Dungeon Crawler Carl. Okay, at number 4, we have a sci-fi epic, which for the first bit of this year, I was low-key obsessed with this book and the movies that have been made out of this book. If you don't know what I'm talking about Dune by Frank Herbert. This is truly an epic of the genre, but I finally understand why. I had watched Dune Part 1, the movie that came out in like 2022 or something like that, and I really liked it a lot. And that was kind of my way of easing into this book, and I do recommend that, because by watching part 1 of that series, you get the first half of the book. It helps you to get acquainted with the terms and the world and all that jazz, and then you can experience the rest of it in book form and just have a good time. But the book itself is so just immersive and so broad and so philosophical, and has such amazing world building and great characters, and it stands as a giant in the genre and in fiction in general. And I get it. I totally get it. Dune is wonderful. I am itching to get to Dune Messiah. I was gonna try to squeeze it in before the end of the year, but it's one that I want to kind of take my time with. Even though it's not too long, I really want to get the full experience out of it. So hopefully very soon in 2025 I'll be reading that. But Dune is the sci-fi book in my head. It is. And so I'm so glad I read it this year. Cannot wait to continue with at least a few more books in the series. I know that the legacy of Dune has kind of been tarnished by just being dragged on and on and on. But the first few books at the very least, I definitely want to read. And I love Dune so much. So good. Here are my top 3 books, guys. This is gross. I bought it used. I don't know what it is, but who cares? Any guesses? Any guesses? You should know this. I talk about these books a lot. Okay, coming in at number 3, we have Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. I love Dennis Lehane. This guy is so good. He writes like my favorite kind of mystery thrillers. They're these stories that are not in any way surface level. You know, like you have this very gripping and very addicting story at the surface, but beneath it you have deep themes, amazing characters, such important messages, and Small Mercies is the perfect exemplification. It exemplifies Dennis Lehane perfectly, okay? This book is set in the 1970s, and we follow Mary Pat, who is a woman who is kind of existing on the edges of society, in that she at one point was more involved in the things going on in her community, but now she kind of just watches. She has a daughter who is 18 years old, and at the very start of that story, her daughter goes missing. And it's everything that happens after that. The backdrop of this is Boston, South Boston, during the desegregation of the schools in that area. And so there are a lot of tensions going on in the area, both from like race, but also from class and culture, because there is this like kind of mafia side to the Boston area as well that is very, very prolific. And there are all of these tensions that are rising in the community. And Mary Pat has tried to abstain from getting into all that before now, but because her daughter's now missing, she has no choice but to delve deep into it. And Mary Pat is ruthless. Oh my goodness. This character was insane. She's like Batman, or something like that. I don't know, man. She's just wild. She will do whatever she has to do to find out where her daughter is. And reading about that was amazing. But it was also interesting because she's a character that you at one time root for greatly, but she also has these deep flaws that you can't help but cringe away from when they're revealed. And so she's a very human character because you're like, I don't agree with you on a lot of things, and the things you're doing are kind of awful sometimes, but at the same time I root for you and I see that you're hurting, you know? And I just think it's so good. It's so brilliant. This is my favorite Dennis Lehane book. He's one of my favorite authors. I've given pretty much everything I've read by him 5 stars, maybe one book I didn't, but oh man, this guy is so good. I love Dennis Lehane. Read Small Mercies. This is my like easiest recommendation, I would say, from my list here. I think that this is an amazing book that everyone should read. I love it. I love it. Okay, my number 2 book of 2025 is The Dark Tower, book 7 in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I love this book. I love this book so much. It almost made my number 1. It's like tied. I mean, they're just so different is the thing. But I love this book so dearly. This is one of my favorite Stephen King books. It's one of my favorite series. It's one of my favorite conclusions to a series ever. This is a very divisive book because Stephen King makes some very, very bold choices in this series, and I completely understand why they wouldn't work for some people. I get it. That's fine. For me, completely worked. And this is my favorite book of The Dark Tower. Again, another opinion that not a lot of people have, but it's mine. It's my opinion. And I love this book so much. The characters, the payoffs, the way that so many Stephen King stories that have had nods to The Dark Tower previously get pulled into this story, the climax, the long journey that these characters have gone on, the emotional things. Oh my gosh, I love The Dark Tower so much. This is a series that I will revisit often. I think I've already reread book 1 since finishing this, And I see myself rereading book 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 as soon as possible. If you want a fantasy series that tests what a fantasy series is, check this out, because it's a lot of different things. It's a little bit of fantasy, it's a little bit of horror, it's a little bit of Western, it's a little bit of sci-fi. It's a lot of things. And not always does it do those things perfectly, but I love it despite its ugliness and its flaws. I love the series. Stephen King nailed it with this book, in my opinion. So good. But what is my book of the year? What is my favorite novel that I read in 2024? You should probably know if you've been on my channel, because I've talked about this at least like 4 to 5 times. And I've talked about this author a handful of times as well. The book is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This book. It's so good. It's so good. I really love this novel. I get why it wouldn't be for everyone. It's disgusting at times. It is ruthless. It is raw. It is depraved. But I love it. I'm sorry. The themes in this are just executed to perfection. There are very few times when I read a book where I really have to think heavily upon the themes and kind of unveil them. Because this book is kind of, in some ways, like an oxymoron to itself, because there are very heavy themes of like faith and religion in here. But you get two very clear portrayals of faith and religion. One that is very, very negative and abusive and manipulative and greedy and disgusting, and another that is very subtle but genuine. And the contrast between those two things is something that can very easily be missed. But I see it and I get it, and I just think Donald Ray Pollock nailed this. He did. The characters in this are so desperate, and each of them has their struggles that they deal with, and some of them are just evil, like straight up evil. And the characters that are good in this have no choice but to sacrifice their goodness throughout the story. And so it's a story that is dark, it is depressing at times, but it's one that I think this book is brilliant. I really do. And I think it's the only one of the books that I read this year that has a shot at being in my 10 favorite books of all time. I didn't put it on my top 10 when I put that video out earlier this year, because I had just read it and I wanted it to sit with me for a little while longer. I think it might be in my top 10 though. I really do. I do want to reread it though. I love it so much, but I want to revisit it and just dig deep into it again. But I will say this, The Devil All the Time is my favorite book of 2024. Of the 200-ish or 200, hopefully by the time I put out this video, books that I have read in the year, this is my favorite. It's so good. Please give it a chance, please. Okay, guys, that's it. We did it. That was a loud clap. Those are my 12 favorite books of 2025. I do also want to give a quick shout out to We Kept Her in the Cellar. This is a book that would have made my honorable mentions list, but somehow I accidentally erased it off my list. So this is an honorable mention. There you have it. Everything else, though, is amazing. All these other books are incredible. Please check out my honorable mentions video if you haven't already. Really enjoyed so many books that I read this year, you guys. So many. And I think 2025 is going to be even better, hopefully. I have a lot of high hopes for the books that I'm going to read in 2025. I'm planning on being very deliberate about what I read, and hopefully it pays off. So thank you so much for watching. Like I said, please let me know what your favorite book of the year was, and read some of these. Come on, guys. I'm begging you. Read some of these books. They're so good. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.